At birth, you entered this world with nothing to defend and nothing to achieve. You did not arrive carrying a name, a story, or a sense of lack. You were not worried about success or failure. You did not question your worth. You simply existed. Your breath moved naturally. Your eyes observed without judgment. And your awareness rested quietly in the present moment. This was your original state. Pure being, pure presence. Before anyone told you who you were already complete. Then the world began its work. A name was placed on you, and with it came identity. You were told, this is you, this is yours, this is how you should behave. Slowly, expectations formed around you like invisible walls. You learned what was praised and what was punished. You learned what made others happy and what brought disapproval. Without realizing it, you began adjusting yourself to fit into these expectations. The process felt normal, even necessary. But something subtle happened during this adjustment. Your attention moved outward, away from your natural awareness and toward approval, safety, and belonging. As language entered your life, thinking took control. Words shaped reality. You were taught labels for everything, including yourself. Good and bad, smart and weak, successful and failed. These labels slowly replaced direct experience. Instead of feeling life, you began interpreting it. Instead of being present, you began evaluating. This is where the forgetting began, not because you did something wrong, but because this is how society functions. You were trained to think before you were trained to observe. The harsh truth is that this forgetting was not accidental. A system built on productivity, comparison, and control does not benefit from deeply conscious individuals. It benefits from predictable ones. So you were taught how to compete, not how to be still. You were taught how to plan, not how to listen. You were taught how to become someone, not how to remain aware. The quieter your inner space became, the louder the external world grew. By the time you reached adulthood, the original silence you were born with felt distant. You identified completely with your thoughts, your fears, and your roles. You believed that your mind was your identity. You believed that life was something you had to manage, fix, or conquer. And yet, beneath all of this noise, the same awareness that existed at birth remained untouched. It never left. It was simply ignored. The first harsh truth you forgot at birth is this: you were never meant to become someone else. You were meant to remain conscious. The forgetting happened so gradually that it felt natural. But remembering begins the moment you realize that who you truly are existed before every label, every belief, and every expectation. This realization is the doorway to awakening. As you grew older, the world slowly taught you a dangerous lesson. It taught you that being accepted mattered more than being real. You learned that fitting in brought safety, while standing out brought risk. So you adapted. You adjusted your behavior, your words, and even your dreams to match what was expected of you. Over time, this adaptation became automatic. You no longer questioned it. The mask you wore for the world slowly fused with your sense of self. You began to define yourself through roles: student, worker, parent, failure, success. Each role came with rules about how you should feel and behave. Along with roles came comparison. You measured your worth against others. You learned to see life as a race rather than an experience. This constant comparison created pressure, and that pressure created fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of falling behind, fear of being rejected. These fears were not born with you. They were learned. As the mind strengthened, you started believing that every thought you had was true. A thought of doubt felt like a fact. A thought of fear felt like a warning. A thought of desire felt like a necessity. You rarely questioned where these thoughts came from or whether they deserved your trust. The mind became a narrator that never stopped speaking, and you assumed that voice was you. This is one of the deepest forms of forgetting. You stopped seeing thoughts as events happening in awareness and began seeing them as your identity. Emotions followed the same pattern. When anger arose, you said, I am angry. When sadness appeared, you said, I am broken. When anxiety arrived, you believed something must be wrong with you or with life. But emotions are temporary movements, not definitions of who you are. They pass through awareness like weather through the sky. Yet because no one taught you how to observe them, you learn to resist or suppress them instead. This resistance created inner conflict, and inner conflict created suffering. The harsh truth hidden here is simple but uncomfortable. Most of your pain does not come from life itself. It comes from believing every thought and identifying with every emotion. You were never taught how to relate to your inner world with clarity. You were taught how to control it or escape it. Distraction became normal. Noise replaced stillness. Busyness replaced presence. And yet, even now, the same awareness that watched your first thoughts as a child is still watching. It has never been confused. It has never been afraid. It has simply been ignored. Section 2 reveals this truth. You did not lose awareness. You covered it with identification. The moment you begin to observe your thoughts instead of believing them, the remembering quietly begins. Without ever being asked, the mind slowly became the rule hour of your life. What began as a useful tool for learning and survival turned into a constant authority over your attention. The mind learned to move endlessly, replaying the past and rehearsing the future. Regret, guilt, and nostalgia pulled you backward, while worry, hope, and fear pushed you forward. Rarely were you fully here. This constant movement felt normal because almost everyone around you lived the same way. Awareness drifted into the background, and unconscious thinking took its place. You began to believe that thinking more would solve life. When a problem appeared, you thought harder. When fear arose, you planned more. When uncertainty entered, you searched for control. Yet no matter how much thinking you did, peace never lasted. The mind could solve practical problems, but it could not bring inner stillness. Instead, it created stories about who you were, what went wrong, and what might happen next. These stories felt personal. And because they felt personal, they felt real. The harsh truth is that the mind thrives on identification. It wants you to believe that its voice is your voice. When you identify with thoughts, every imagined threat feels dangerous. Every negative idea feels like truth. This is how suffering multiplies. Not because life is always painful, but because the mind turns temporary experiences into permanent identities. You stopped experiencing fear and started believing you were a fearful person. You stopped feeling sadness and started believing something was wrong with you. Another unnoticed shift occurred. You moved from living life to managing it. Instead of responding naturally, you reacted automatically. Instead of feeling deeply, you analyzed constantly. Moments passed without being fully experienced. Meals were eaten while thinking. Conversations happened while planning responses. Life became something you observed through thought, rather than lived through presence. This is one of the deepest costs of unconsciousness, yet the mind itself is not the enemy. The problem is not thinking, but unconscious thinking. The mind is meant to serve awareness, not replace it. When awareness sleeps, the mind rules. When awareness awakens, the mind becomes a tool again. This distinction changes everything. The moment you notice a thought without following it, awareness reappears. Even a few seconds of presence breaks the pattern. The truth revealed in this section is uncomfortable but liberating. You were never trapped by life. You were trapped by identification with thought. Awareness has always been closer than the next idea in your head. The mind may continue to speak, but it no longer has to command. This is the moment when consciousness begins to rise from sleep, not through effort, but through noticing. Suffering often feels like an enemy, something to avoid or eliminate as quickly as possible. Yet in the deeper movement of life, Suffering serves a different purpose. It arrives when unconscious patterns can no longer sustain themselves. Pain enters not to punish you, but to interrupt the sleep of identification. Loss, failure, heartbreak, anxiety, or deep exhaustion appear at moments when the old way of living stops working. What once distracted you no longer satisfies. What once motivated you no longer inspires. This confusion is not a mistake. It is a signal. For many, this stage feels like falling apart. The mind searches for reasons, explanations, and solutions. It asks what went wrong, who is to blame, and how to return to comfort. But awakening does not begin with answers. It begins with questions. Questions that arise not from curiosity, but from necessity. Why am I suffering even when life looks fine on the surface? Why does achievement not bring peace? Why does control feel so exhausting? Easy questions crack open the illusion that happiness can be manufactured through external means. In this breaking, something unexpected appears, space. When the mind realizes it cannot fix everything, it pauses. In that pause, awareness becomes noticeable again. You start sensing moments of stillness between thoughts. Silence no longer feels empty. It feels alive. You may begin noticing that when you stop resisting what is happening, the intensity of suffering softens. This does not mean pain disappears, but it loses its psychological grip. The story around the pain weakens. The harsh truth here is that awakening rarely arrives through comfort. Comfort keeps illusions intact. It is disruption that exposes them. This is why so many awakenings are born from crisis. Not because crisis is good, but because it strips away false certainty. It forces you to face the present moment without escape. When distractions fail, awareness has space to emerge. At this stage, you may feel drawn to silence, solitude, or introspection, not as escape, but as honesty. You start noticing how often you resist the present. You see how the mind constantly argues with reality. When you stop feeding that argument, peace appears quietly, without effort. You realize that suffering increases when you demand life to be different, and it decreases when you allow it to be as it is. Section 4 reveals a powerful realization. Suffering is not the opposite of awakening. It is often the doorway. The moment you stop running from discomfort and begin listening to it, consciousness begins to stir. What felt like collapse was actually the loosening of illusion. What felt like darkness was the mind losing its dominance. And in that loss, awareness returns to the center of your experience. Awakening does not arrive as a dramatic event or a sudden transformation into someone special. It comes quietly, almost, unnoticed at first. There is no fireworks, no permanent state of bliss, and no escape from ordinary life. Instead, there is a subtle shift in how you relate to your experience. You begin to see rather than react. You begin to notice rather than judge. This shift is simple, but it changes everything. One of the first signs of this awakening is distance. Not emotional coldness, but clarity. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer pull you completely into their stories. You start seeing a thought as a thought, not as an absolute truth. When fear appears, you recognize it as a movement in the body and mind, not as a command that must be followed. This creates space. In that space, awareness becomes stronger than habit. Emotions also begin to change their role. Instead of being suppressed or acted out, they are allowed. Sadness can be felt without labeling yourself as weak. Anger can be felt without turning it into violence or guilt. Joy can be felt without fear of losing it. Emotions move more freely when they are not resisted. You realize that resistance was never protecting you. It was only trapping energy inside the mind. Presence slowly becomes deeper than reaction. You notice small moments, the sound of breathing, the feeling of walking, the weight of your body sitting still. These ordinary sensations begin to feel rich and alive. Life no longer feels like something that is happening somewhere else. It is happening here. Now, this return to the present is not forced. It feels natural, like coming home after a long absence. Another important realization emerges. You are not becoming something new. You are remembering something old. Awareness was never absent. It was simply covered by noise. When the noise settles, what remains is simple, open, and calm. This awareness does not need improvement. It does not need to be fixed. It only needs to be noticed. Silence begins to feel different at this stage. Earlier, silence may have felt uncomfortable or empty. Now it feels full, alive, supportive. You may find yourself enjoying moments without stimulation, without distraction, without explanation. This does not mean you withdraw from life. It means you meet life without constant mental interference. Section 5 reveals an essential truth. Awakening is not about escaping the world or rejecting thought. It is about seeing clearly. When clarity arises, suffering loses its intensity, even when challenges remain. Life becomes less of a battle and more of a flow, not because everything goes your way, but because you are no longer fighting reality. Awareness becomes your natural state again, just as it was at the beginning. As awareness deepens, another truth begins to reveal itself, and it is often uncomfortable for the mind to accept. No one else can walk this path for you. Teachers can speak, books can explain, videos can inspire. But awakening itself is not something that can be handed over. It is not transferred through words or achieved by copying someone else's understanding. It happens through direct observation of your own experience. This is where responsibility returns to you. For a long time, the mind looks for authority outside itself. It seeks someone to follow, something to believe, or a system to rely on. This is natural, especially in the beginning. Guidance can be helpful. Pointers can open doors. But eventually, leaning too heavily on external sources becomes another form of avoidance. You begin collecting ideas instead of seeing truth. You begin repeating concepts instead of living awareness. The harsh truth is that spiritual knowledge can become another distraction if it replaces direct presence. Awakening requires honesty, not moral honesty, but inner honesty. The willingness to see what is actually happening inside you without trying to fix it, justify it, or escape it. This means noticing reactions as they arise, seeing fear without labeling it as failure, watching desire without obeying it, observing resistance without judging it. This simple observation brings clarity, but it also removes excuses. You can no longer blame the world, your past, or other people for your inner state. Taking responsibility does not mean controlling your experience. It means stopping the habit of unconsciousness. It means choosing awareness over autopilot. Again and again, often this choice feels small and ordinary. Pausing before reacting, breathing before speaking, feeling before thinking. These moments may seem insignificant, but they weaken years of conditioning. Another harsh TR, appears here. Awakening cannot be postponed. The mind loves delay. It says later, when life is easier, when conditions are perfect, when understanding is complete. But awareness only exists now. There is no future moment where presence suddenly appears. Every attempt to wait is another escape from the present. Responsibility means recognizing that this moment is the only doorway. At this stage, you may feel alone in a new way. Old identities fade. Old motivations lose their grip. People around you may not understand the shift happening within you. This can feel isolating, but it is also freeing. You are no longer living to meet expectations. You are living from clarity. This does not make you separate from others. It makes you more honest with yourself. Section 6 reveals this essential truth. Awakening is not about being saved. It is about seeing. The moment you stop waiting for someone or something to complete you, awareness stands on its own. Responsibility returns where it always belong in you. As awareness deepens and becomes more stable, fear often rises in ways that feel confusing and unexpected. This fear is not always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it appears as subtle discomfort, restlessness, or a quiet pull back toward old habits and familiar identities. The mind senses that its control is weakening, and it reacts instinctively. For the ego, which survives through identity, certainty, and constant comparison, awakening feels like a threat to survival. Letting go feels dangerous because the ego believes it is you. This is why fear often intensifies just before a deeper level of clarity emerges. The mind begins to ask persistent questions. Who will I be without my story? What will give my life meaning if I stop chasing approval or success? How will I protect myself if I stop trying to control outcomes? These questions create anxiety because the ego has never known life without effort and defense. It defines itself through struggle, ambition, and resistance. When awareness starts dissolving these structures, the ego interprets it as death. But what is dissolving is not your existence. It is the illusion that you are the thinker of thoughts and the manager of life. At this stage, fear may bring old memories to the surface. Unresolved emotions, past disappointments, and long-buried insecurities can suddenly appear. This can feel overwhelming if misunderstood. But this is not regression, it is release. Awareness is strong enough now to allow what was previously suppressed to be seen and felt. The mind may try to distract you with urgency, doubt, or sudden desires, hoping to regain control. The key is not to fight these movements, but to remain present with them. When fear is allowed without resistance, something profound happens. You begin to notice that fear is not solid. It is a sensation in the body, a tightening of the chest, a quickening of the breath, a stream of thoughts. Awareness watches all of this without being harmed by it. You realize that fear has never actually touched what you truly are. This realization weakens its power. Fear depends on identification to survive. When identification ends, fear loses its authority. Behind fear, a new kind of freedom appears. Not the freedom to escape responsibility or avoid life, but the freedom to meet life without constant defense. You no longer react automatically. There is a pause. In that pause, clarity arises. Choices become simpler. Actions feel more aligned. You begin responding from presence rather than from conditioning. Another important realization unfolds here. You do not disappear when identity loosens. In fact, life becomes richer and more vivid. Creativity flows without effort. Compassion arises naturally because you are no longer trapped in self-protection. Relationships become more honest. You begin trusting life instead of constantly preparing for danger. Section 7 reveals a powerful truth. Fear is not an obstacle to awakening. It is a threshold. When you stop running from it and allow awareness to meet it fully, the threshold opens. What lies beyond is not emptiness or loss, but grounded presence and quiet confidence. What once felt like the end of who you were becomes the beginning of conscious living. The final truth you forgot at birth is simple, yet it carries a weight that the mind struggles to accept. You are not here to become someone. You are not here to achieve a certain status, collect accolades, or accumulate experiences to prove your worth. From the moment you were born, you were already complete. Awareness was your original state. Presence was your natural condition. Yet over time, layers of conditioning, fear, and identification covered this truth. You forgot who you were at the core, and the journey of awakening is simply a process of remembering. This remembering does not happen through effort or force. It happens when you stop resisting the present moment, when you stop trying to fix yourself, your life, or others, when you stop seeking happiness outside of yourself. The mind wants to postpone this remembering. It wants you to believe that freedom is somewhere ahead, that enlightenment is a distant goal, or that perfection is required before you can be at peace. But these are illusions created by thought. The reality is always now. Awareness is always here. It was here before your first thought, and it will remain after your last. Responsibility plays a central role in this truth. No one is coming to save you. No philosophy, teacher, or spiritual system can awaken you for yourself. They can only guide, point, or illuminate the path. Awakening happens when you take full responsibility for noticing your own awareness, for observing your mind without judgment, and for meeting life as it is. This can feel daunting because the ego is accustomed to dependency, to control, and to believing that solutions exist outside of itself. Awakening challenges all of this. It asks for honesty, courage, and presence. When you remember, you begin to see life differently. You no longer chase endlessly for approval, success, or material gain, because you recognize that these were never the source of peace. You see thoughts as passing phenomena, emotions as temporary waves, and experiences as fleeting. What remains is unchanging awareness. You no longer react automatically to life. Instead, you witness it. You act from presence, not from fear. You respond with clarity rather than habit. Life itself becomes a mirror, reflecting the depth of your consciousness rather than the limits of your mind. This remembering also dissolves the illusion of separation. You recognize that the awareness you are is the same awareness. S within every being. Compassion, love, and connection flow naturally because there is no longer a barrier of fear or identification. The world does not need to change for you to be free. You are already whole, you are already present. You only forgot, and remembering is enough. The truth you forgot at birth is uncomfortable because it contradicts everything the mind believes about becoming, achieving, or controlling. Yet it is liberating because it ends the struggle. You are not lost. You are not incomplete. You do not need to chase or fix. You simply need to awaken to the presence that has always been here. Remembering this transforms everything. Life is no longer a battle. It becomes a flow, a direct experience, a revelation of consciousness itself. This is the moment of true awakening, the moment when you realize that everything you sought was never outside you. You are already whole. You are already free. You are already awake. All that remains is the remembering.